I have pants at home. And then Rick goes, Jerry, if I make you pants, they'll be better than your pants at home. Because he's going to make like...
Yeah. That wasn't this past episode, though. That was the one.
That was the one before it.
Right. I remember that quote.
All right. So the goal tonight is to not sound like stoners laughing at Rick and Morty. So
yeah,
well, if we do that, we'll be ahead of the game.
Okay. Well, we might as well go ahead and chalk this one up as a loss then.
No needless giggles.
We're needlessly giggling right now, talking about not giggling.
But it's getting it out of the way. This is the warm up where you just get your giggles out.
More giggles is what it is.
This is going to be a really serious episode, guys.
It's going to be something. It's going to
get your shit together. No smiles, no laughter. This is
just dead serious.
Justin, can you just real quick before we get
nothing matters?
Can you say something, because I think I had you muted on Zencaster.
Yeah. So here I am talking right now, saying words.
Yeah. I somehow had you muted, or you had yourself muted. We're gonna go with you had yourself muted because that absolves me of responsibility. And
all right, that's cool.
That it matters because we weren't live, but we're live on YouTube and live on Facebook now as my cats are going nuts up and down my stairs.
Alrighty.
Kick it off, Natalie.
What? Oh, okay.
What?
I'm ready. Okay, tonight's episode of the Science Enthusiast Podcast is brought to you by nothing, because nobody exists on purpose. Everybody's going to die, so you might as well listen to our show.
Oh, we're doing the full thing now.
We're doing it. Yeah, I want you to go.
Oh,
I want you to introduce. I told you this before. But you
did, and then I forgot because I normally do the sponsor. But hello, and thank you for listening to, or in this case, watching for some of you, the Science Enthusiast Podcast. My name is Dan, and as always, I'm joined by my parenthesis. Dan, think of something complimentary. I'm sorry, I didn't say that in bold. We can edit that now. I'll dub over it later. Friend Natalie, and we're also joined by the host of the.
Yeah.
We're also joined by the host of the Real Atheology Podcast, Justin, is it Schieber and Ben Watkins?
No, it's Justin Schieber and Ben Watkins.
Schieber.
Yeah. So, okay.
I'm already triggered.
Yeah, I know. So before we talk about Rick and Morty, which is the only reason we're really gathered here today, I want to get a little bit of the Real Atheology backstory, what you guys do, all of that. With how did you meet? I want to know, do you have a cute meeting story where you're like, we need to make a podcast together? I mean, Dan and I got drunk at Nexus in New York and hung out at Taco Bell at 4 a.m. So I
was belligerent.
Do you have that kind of story, or was it something way more just we really want to talk philosophy and religion?
Well, the first time we met in DC, we were belligerently drunk.
This is true. No, so I had been doing. I was on the Reasonable Doubts podcast for a number of years, and then once that kind of disbanded, I still had a lot of things I wanted to say and philosophical interests, and so I started a YouTube channel. And after a while, it's just a real pain in the butt to try and do videos and editing and all that stuff. So. And because of my long format of discussion, I preferred to do a podcast. And so for what was it, the Reason Rally last year in June, Ben and I met through a mutual friend, and we ended up hanging out the whole time and discovering that we really kind of honed in on a lot of agreement in philosophy of religion, and we took it very seriously, and we were very interested in the subject. And so once I switched to podcast, Ben was the obvious choice as a co-host.
Awesome. So can you just describe a little bit of what philosophy of religion is and what you try to tackle in your show?
Go ahead, Ben.
Ben.
Yeah. So the philosophy of religion, there's a philosophy of pretty much everything. And so religion is no exception. And so what we do in the philosophy of religion is we ask questions about meaning, purpose, God, afterlife, things of a religious nature. And so these questions we think can have right or wrong answers. And so we basically dispense with burdens of proof and follow the arguments wherever they lead. And so we say, okay, here's evidence in one camp and here's evidence in the other. What interesting conclusions can we draw? Can we salvage anything from our religious concepts? What concepts do we need to jettison? How do we make progress and move forward? And because a lot of people think, philosophy of religion, and they immediately think Christianity or Islam or Judaism, and they leave out all these other traditions, Eastern traditions like Taoism and Buddhism, Confucianism. And then what Justin and I find very interesting, classical theism, just the God, like a God without all the baggage. So an omnipotent, omniscient, morally perfect being who created the universe for a purpose. That's the concept that we're really interested in, and we find a lot of interesting people to dialogue with.
Yeah, and I mean, what I found interesting about listening to your episodes, and even just the way that I think both of you engage on Facebook and in comments and all of, because we know it can just be a fucking dumpster fire, like the internet and some of these kinds of discussions. You can tell, and for anybody who is listening to this who hasn't listened to your show, I mean, it's a very respectful debate style that you guys have, which I think is interesting and unique in, the fiery
what we're saying is
world
it's
that we live
better
in.
than what we could do.
Well, it's certainly, yeah. So, because I'm not a good arguer myself at all, but really, I think that that's what makes it stand out. So I'm curious though, what kind of response have you gotten, especially from like atheists, for having these respectful debates with people who
we piss people off on both sides all the time.
Yeah,
I mean, it's true. Like, which I think is a testament. I think it's because Justin and I are doing something right. Where to give an example, we have come out fairly strongly against the lack of belief definition of atheism. And we had to kind of tiptoe around that issue because we know it fires people in the atheist community up. And so we're probably not done feeling the pushback on that. And I'm sure Justin has other examples too.
Well, I mean, one of the biggest, issues is that we really just want to not be partisans. We don't want to be apologists for atheism. I have no interest in, in a sense, we're unavoidably that because we called our show Real Atheology. But we also want to be able to admit when our opponents have evidence in their favor. And so we try to do that. Most of the episodes of the show are interviews with various philosophers discussing some of their work, their contributions to philosophy of religion. We also have a few debates, and again, these debates are they're quite respectable and they're fair-minded. We try and be as fair as possible as we can. We just think that that's a kind of approach that is a bit lacking at times, and so we are attempting to fill that little niche.
Yeah.
So. Yeah,
to kind of like go deep on those conversations, right, and in a respectful way to make the conversations continue.
We're kind of looking in, maybe not to change our minds about everything, but I'd certainly one of the most exhilarating experiences for a philosopher is to find that really good argument. That's the holy grail for a philosopher, to really feel the force of an argument and change your mind in real time. That's something that's really exhilarating. And so theists can help us do that in the sense that they have their beliefs are so much different than ours. We have so much room to disagree with that we have the opportunities to find ways that, and it worst case scenario, we end up being theists. And if theism's true, there's an all-powerful being who cares about us unconditionally and wants us to live with him forever, growing ever deeper into a meaningful relationship with him. That seems, That's worst case scenario.
You're like, I'm okay with that.
I'm okay with that.
That's all right.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's false. Ben thinks it's false, but like we
I was
take
going to
it
say,
seriously enough to
in
explore
between
it.
times that he's drowning you in 5 feet of rain in Texas.
Christian God's a dick, though.
So those are the things that we ask ourselves. We say, okay, when we look at these apparently gratuitous evils in the world, like what kind of implications do they have? And I don't want to speak for Justin, but I'm fairly confident saying that it's pretty decisive in that there just isn't this all-powerful, perfectly loving being. Someone wouldn't do that.
There are competing hypotheses that can explain the data far better.
Yeah. Enter skeptical theism.
Yeah.
Which if we talk about that, it's going to be all we talk about all night, because that's about the dumbest sounding title for something that I think I've ever heard. But
certainly not the best name for it, but it's apparently the one that's stuck.
which is I feel like all I need to know.
It's coined by an atheist, oddly enough. By the way, an atheist.
Well, being an atheist does not make you intelligent.
Well, this one was. But anyways, besides the point.
But so discussions of philosophy, religion, all of that. So I'd listened to some episodes of your podcast and seen, especially you, Ben, what you have posted on Facebook over the months, where I see Rick and Morty memes coming through my Facebook feed. I'm like, oh, I want to do a Rick and Morty episode. Who can we ask? These guys. The obvious choice. Let's bring the guys who do a very respectable, wonderful show about philosophy of religion
to talk about a drunk grandpa who
to this. We're inviting you. Yeah,
two big themes in Rick and Morty,
so
it makes so much sense.
Absolutely,
we invited you to this shit show. Yeah, we decided to bring you here. And so I guess where do we start? I mean, do we start with kind of?
We could start with atheism. I mean,
want to start with atheism? Let's start there.
It's in the very first scene of the very first episode. I mean, Rick tells Summer right that there is no God. You got to rip that Band-Aid off. The show starts off with very heavy atheistic undertones. It's unapologetic about it, and it says it right out from the front. And you see it as a theme throughout the show. You see Rick's existential struggle. And at times it seems like, he might believe that there is this God, or he doesn't believe that there is this God. And then there's times where he's mad at this imaginary God. There's one episode where he meets a literal Satan, but then exposes him for the fraud that he is.
Right.
So there's all kinds of different atheistic themes. The latest episode.
Yeah, underlying the entire show is the kind of the absence of God and a kind of a wrestling with whether or not the implications of that are bad. Traditionally, we've associated some of the deepest aspects of human life with religious ideas. So morality, what it means to have a fulfilling life, to find meaning in one's life. Typically, religion has played that role, but since the modern world, that kind of explanatory role that God has traditionally played has kind of been exported to the sciences, and there are implications to that. Some people think that the implications are that there can be no meaning in life. There can be no kind of fulfilling life to live. There can be no real objective fact of the matter of whether or not something is a good thing to do. Does morality fall apart at the death of God? These are questions that have been debated for centuries, and this show adds a layer of humor onto it, and it's fascinating for that reason, and others, of course.
It laughs at the void.
Yes, it does.
It does laugh at the void. And I think it's that sort of relatable thing where, I I feel like I've seen it a lot lately, even on social media, people like, there's no meaning. How do you kind of get through the day sort of thing? And I think that this show is kind of about figuring out a little bit of that quest for meaning in the world and laughing at it and knowing that, I mean, we're not here for any purpose. There's no God that has given us like a particular purpose or anything, but how do we, just don't think about it?
What motivates us? What,
Mm-hmm.
As they say, what gets us out of bed in the morning, right?
Well, how do we deal with searching for meaning in a universe that is silent, that's not going to respond to our searches for meaning? And my guy, Albert Camus, that's his whole philosophy that ends up being a theme in Rick and Morty is absurdism. And absurdism is the belief that look, we are beings that constantly seek meaning, but we are constantly going to fail at that. We're never going to find the meaning because the universe is silent. And so one of Camus' famous questions is, should I kill myself or have a cup of coffee? And what he's saying is, look, if I don't have a reason to go on, I can always just kill myself. And so that whatever reason, however you answer that question, if you say, okay, should I kill myself or should I have a cup of coffee? If you choose the cup of coffee, you're saying, okay, there was some reason why you chose that coffee. That reason is your meaning. And you have to pretend like that's what's going to make you happy. And so this is his analogy of the myth of Sisyphus, Sisyphus being a Greek god who would constantly roll a boulder up a hill only for it to roll back down once it reached the top. And so he uses this as an example. He's like, look, this is exactly like humans in this indifferent universe trying to find meaning. It's just like Sisyphus pulling that rock. And then when we think we found it, we really haven't. It's just the rock just rolls back down and we have to do it all over again. And so that's what Camus means when he says we have to imagine Sisyphus happy.
But if we can find small delights in the movements required to move that rock up the hill, then sometimes moving the rock is good for its own sake, even if it's a continual toil.
Mm-hmm. And so the person that can do that, Camus calls the absurd hero. He's the person that he accepts the indifference of the universe. He accepts his role in it. He accepts that he's not going to fight. He's going to suffer. There is no intrinsic meaning, and he laughs at it. He loves it. He thinks that it's the best thing that could happen to him. And so Rick is a figure who wanes kind of between this absurd hero and Nietzsche's Übermensch. I won't go too much into the Übermensch. I'll let Justin handle that one.
Well, so here's what's interesting. I mean, this notion that without God, that it should be a rather deplorable existence. It's interesting. There's a kind of analogy in the show with this. If we don't have purpose for our lives, are we going to drive ourselves crazy? Think about the Mr. Meeseeks, right? These little creatures that Rick creates, and they just come into existence, serve a basic purpose, a task, a simple task, and if they can't do it, they exist until they can do it. And if it's something that if their powers are incapable of completing that task, then their existence just becomes this horrible thing. But should it be? What if these little Meeseeks characters ventured to form relationships with each other that they found meaningful in their own right, rather than exist for some externally imposed reason, some purpose from some other agent? They rather took life by the balls and actually did something with it that they found deeply satisfying.
And
go ahead.
Sorry. One of the brilliance of this show is how, if to use the Meeseeks example, if you take Camus' absurdism and you flip it You just insert. So you have us as creatures that are fumbling through the world looking for meaning and don't exist for a solitary purpose. But then you look at the Meeseeks, and he even says, he's like, look, we're created for a solitary purpose, which we'll go through any lengths to fulfill. We don't go through the world fumbling for meaning. And so kind of the axis that this flips on, the premise that stays the same in both cases is existence is pain.
Yeah.
And so the Meeseeks see the existence as a pain as the reason to do their solitary purpose, whatever it is. For us, it's for trying to find that meaning. Nietzsche famously said, to live is to suffer, but to survive is to find some meaning in the suffering. So that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to find that meaning. Whereas the Meeseeks is trying to find a way to disappear.
Yeah. Well, and I was going to say, I think without meaning, I think it's sort of empowering to try to find your own and find something to, the reason to keep pushing the rock up the hill or whatever, and not just live because you have some, predetermined purpose. In one of those episodes, there was that like butter robot, and all
Pass
like it's only that's all it was there for, and because that was the purpose given to it and defined to it. And I mean, imagine living a life like that where you just think, or you have just one purpose, and that's it, and that's shit.
Well, you can contrast that with Rick and say, okay, well, here's someone who can do anything whenever he wants, and he's extremely depressed. He's an alcoholic. He's not happy. So you have this. That's why he says to the Pass the Butter robot, he says, "Welcome to the club, pal." Didn't matter what hand they were dealt, they still left going, "Oh my God, nothing matters."
So there's Rick. So then where does Morty come into this? Like, are they two sides of all of us, or?
So Morty is human angst. Morty is all of the parts of us that when we face this void, when we face this meaningless universe, it's a very intimidating spectacle. And so that's why Morty is, he's always hesitant to make certain moves. He's always shy in certain other areas, but he's the part that always goes along with Rick. He's it's Rick has this crazy relationship with Morty in that he kind of thinks he's a piece of shit and he gets on his nerves, but he has this strange connection to it. And that mirrors kind of the human condition in that we have all these anxieties and these worries, but they're about things that we kind of like, we wouldn't be ourselves without those. And so if you're going to have this character like Rick, who's so far removed from the average human person, again, he's kind of like this ubermensch. He can do anything he wants whenever he wants. He just has to want to do it. You've got to have something to kind of contrast with that and bring it back down. Bring it to make the characters more relatable. Batman has his Robin, Superman, and Lois Lane. Lois Lane is the human character that it brings those characters back down to earth.
Yeah, he's kind of a foil against which the kind of wild raucousness of Rick can be played out.
Conscience.
Yeah. I mean, it's this bizarre kind of contrast that exists there. With regard to, like, if we were to buy into the notion that like religion is for the weak-minded, all this stuff, we might think, well, okay, shouldn't the religious character in this show, right? Kind of plagued by these insecurities and all this self-doubt, doesn't that kind of fit the, what we would want to think of as like the stereotype of religious people that, use religion as a crutch, right? But he's kind of he's kind of had his face rubbed in the void essentially by Rick, right? He's unable to kind of reach out to that kind of religious sensibility. He's unable to get in contact with that because his uncle is just violently showing him the way reality is.
Grandfather.
It's terrifying for him in that way. So,
and they're connect, like they have to be connected, don't they? Rick and Morty, like they
don't have to be, as long as Rick has that character to contrast. So there's episodes where Rick goes on an adventure with Jerry and Morty stays back with his mom. So like it doesn't have to be Rick by himself all the time. Or
but Jerry
Rick
plays a similar role though.
Do what?
Jerry is an adult. Jerry plays a similar role as Morty though.
He does, but in a different.
The adult Morty.
Yeah, and just kind of the piece of shit loser part that like we all kind of know a Jerry, or we all kind of are a Jerry in a way, and it's that part of, ourselves that we just go, oh God damn it, he's talking again. Okay, here we go, and you know that whatever he's going to say is just going to be incredibly stupid or just incredibly corny, but that's just the way he is, and that's just how some people are, and Jerry at times, there's one episode that I really like where at the end of the episode, Rick tries to kill himself and fails because he's too drunk to pull it off. And he's just broken up with a hive mind. So he had like everything going for it. And Jerry just wanted his weed eater. And so at the end of the episode, Rick is passed out from a failed suicide attempt, and with a broken heart from a hive mind. Jerry has his weed eater, and he's just happy. He's just content. He's just going on about his, and so that's
weed eating the driveway, no less.
Yeah. So that's an interesting way of showing that it's again kind of the pass the butter robot and Rick comparison, where you can see like, look, it doesn't matter what hand you're dealt. You could end up being very happy, or you could end up being very miserable.
It's just you got to have something to dangle the jingly keys in front of you to keep yourself entertained, and eyes on the prize.
When Rick didn't feel like he had it anymore, he said, "Okay, instead of having this cup of coffee, I'm just going to kill myself."
Oh, so he faced that.
Yeah, well, so
coffee more than I
moment.
do. I think that's
So absurdism is a very, very, so when the first show first came out, existentialism and absurdism are kind of two very similar philosophies, but they branch off in important ways. And because existentialists believe that you can create meaning in the world, that there's ways for you to do that, whereas the absurdist says no, that you can't do that. The rock's gonna fall down. You can try to create the meaning, but it's ultimately going to get you nowhere. And so if you pay attention, like in the Szechuan sauce episode, you think that Rick has done something very profound. He's had this altruistic act towards his family, and this is some way that's going to create his meaning. And then he goes, no, my one-armed man is the Szechuan sauce. And you go, what? That doesn't make any sense. And that's the point. It's an absurdist. Yeah. It could be, it's not about some condiment from the late 90s at McDonald's. It could have been anything in that slot. It's just, none of it matters in the end anyways. And all that meaning that you thought Rick was creating, and that the direction that the show and the character growth that was going to progress, it just never happened. It just never materialized. Instead, we got, corny jokes about Szechuan sauce.
Well, and I think even then, you can kind of get back to the jingly keys. You got to, and we all do this, we look for things to try to synthesize our own happiness. Like if you have a shitty job, you want to be pissed off at it and sad at work all the time, but then you find something to hold on to find value in. So just to survive, just to make it through the day, even if that is, well, now it's Friday, I don't have to go to work tomorrow. So that's what I'm working towards. That's how I'm going to be happy. Now I have 2 days away from this cesspool of a building that I have to stay at for 40 hours a week.
So this is a great place to transition. I've been talking about Camus and absurdism for a while. Justin why don't you step in and talk about values? Nietzsche is he's the other big elephant in the room. I'll let you.
Yeah,
he's in the Google Doc, so please go for it.
Yeah. So I think most people are familiar with this. I think most people associate the name Nietzsche with the God is dead, the parable of the madmen. I'll just quote from it real briefly here. God is dead. God remains dead, and we have killed him. How shall we comfort ourselves, the murderers of all murderers? What was holiest and mightiest of all that the world has yet owned has bled to death under our knives. Then it goes on to ask, and this has to do with, what do we do now, right? It asks, of atonement, what sacred games shall we have to invent? Is not the greatness of this deed too great for us? The notion here is again the kind of existentialist worry that once God is out of the picture, we're faced with a decision. Do we construct our value system independent of what we have to that point seen as the moral assumptions of the world, a kind of Christian, at least in the Western world, a kind of Christian value system underlying
slave morality.
What Nietzsche called slave morality. And so the Übermensch is this notion of this kind of overman who's just supposed to essentially just say, yeah, that's what we're going to do. We're going to construct a value system and just find ways to make life worth living, essentially.
Yeah. And so in the show, taking that idea into account, who do you think represents that idea?
Rick.
Oh, Rick, definitely.
It is, right?
Yeah,
okay.
Absolutely. Rick is the Overman.
So he's there to kind of
so he just
going, right?
spits on the common morality of everyday people, and he sees him as something that's great. That's great. And so something like morality is something that would hold Rick back. Mm-hmm. And so that's what he wants to do away with. And that's a very Übermensch attitude. Yeah.
Now, I found that, have you guys all watched the most recent episode of the show?
I did just a couple hours ago.
So I found
the one about toxins for all those listening.
Toxins, yes. And just
episode 6, season 3.
Yeah. Yes. Thank you for everybody else. So,
go on.
so that one, thinking about kind of all of these different pieces that make up people, kind of the good, the bad, for lack of a better word, to see Rick in this episode just kind of become a little bit of a different person. And it was kind of interesting to me. And I don't know, just kind of how he changed a little bit in how he was interacting with.
He didn't have jaundice anymore.
He didn't have that. No. and then he had his whole like boogery looking person stuck in a vault somewhere. So the toxic part of him that left, is that represented by any of these kind of schools of thought or philosophies? Like, is that the nihilist part that went away? Or
I don't know. What do you think? What do you think, Ben?
I was curious watching it.
I think it's the part of so these were the parts of human nature that you would rather, if you could discard, you'd think that you would want to get rid of them. That if we could just step into a machine and get all of the quote unquote bad things out, that would be a good thing. And so Rick at one point says, how does the machine distinguish between what's good and what's bad? Well, it can't. And what he's driving at is that, look, these toxins are part of who they are. If you take them out, you're going to have a different person. Yeah. These are all of our flaws, all of our vices, all of our faults. All of these shape who we are as people, and you couldn't just rip them out without having serious ramifications. And so there becomes this question. Rick even explicitly poses it. He says, well, what if these other things became sentient? What kind of obligation would you have towards this thing then? Because Rick's very adamant about, putting this thing back in them, whereas Morty's like,
right. Morty finally has the confidence he has. And he's very much enjoying it.
And so Rick doesn't really like the person that he's become because of this this event, whereas Morty has. And so it was a different way of playing with the nature of persons. And you better stop me right there, because the conversations on personal identity, I could go on all night.
Well, okay, so I'm curious, just for you guys on a personal level, if you could go into a machine and take what you perceive as the bad shit away from you, would you do it? Or do you accept the idea that we are the sum total of all of our experiences, good and shitty and whatever, and you move forward with that? I'm just curious.
Something Sith, absolute, something.
So there's there's a number of ways one could parse that question. There's the notion of having, being the person who I am today. Would I alter myself in this moment and live the rest of my existence in a new way in which I kind of shed those deplorables from my person? Or there's the question of, would I have rather been a different person from the beginning? Mm-hmm. Those are, I don't know. I don't know how to answer those questions. Those are there's too many things at play.
Too many things. Okay.
So many variables at play.
So you're not answering. Broadbent, what about you?
What
are you doing in my? You didn't listen. All right, Ben, what are you doing?
No, I said I contributed. I said something Sith absolutes. I think it's not a valid question to say, well, I'm gonna get rid of all the bad things. Like I have multiple things that I would change about myself if possible, but some of those things also keep me entertained and keep me from going crazy on a daily basis. So I think you can't. I mean, of course, it's the entire purpose of it is of the exercise is, would you do it or not? But I mean, you have to fall somewhere in the middle on not getting rid of everything, because like Rick was. I mean, he was just fucking bored. Whenever
you will fundamentally change who you are. Absolutely. Like, I mean, I think we can all identify certain aspects of our behavioral tendencies, of our, just general dispositions that we might like to take a kind of personality scalpel to and remove. If someone is plagued with self-doubt all the time, or if someone, is bad at relationships or something, there's all these different kind of things.
Or something like that. Yeah, some sort of.
We're not having an intervention for me, please. We're not having an intervention for me.
Certainly people
who have bad relationships, ADD, like, come on.
Yeah, I mean, there's obviously there's going to be people who fall on all sorts of spectrums of how happy they are with themselves, and so there's always going to be that kind of interesting flirting with that idea. But yeah, to purge ourselves of all things that we associate with, that we associate negatively with, that would be a really dangerous thing, because you don't know how those affect other aspects of your person. So, for example, I mean, some of these negative tendencies of human beings in general served extremely important purposes in our evolutionary development, right? The fact that we're our groupishness is so intense. The fact that we associate with our kin, and we have less empathy for non-kin members, in other ways in which we identify groups and then out-groups, in-groups, all that stuff. All those things are manifesting themselves in incredibly toxic ways, political, social, religious, all these different aspects of our ways which we divide up our populations of the world are incredibly damaging. But at the same time, they were necessary in our early development. They served an important purpose.
Yeah.
It's interesting how these things in different contexts are incredibly good or incredibly bad, depending on where the goal is, essentially.
And I think it's interesting that a cartoon brings up a lot of these topics.
Yeah.
And
about
that's
dick and fart jokes.
Yeah, right. Yeah. So the important stuff. And then you get thinking about what everything means and all of that. And that's why I think it's such a fucking intelligent show.
It's like South Park in that sense. It's one of the, you think that it's going to be just slapstick comedy or crude comedy, but in fact, it's got really deep themes.
Well, and that's
motives.
Yeah, and that's
it's all of the above, really.
It is.
Yeah.
It's all of it. It's all of those things, and that's why part of it is fascinating to me because it resonates with so many people. This show, and even when I asked in a Facebook post, to our friends, whatever, why do you guys like this show? People were writing like paragraphs about why this show
I remember that post
resonates with them, and it was just cool to see that something that there's just ridiculous jokes, absurd plot lines, all these infinite universes, all just crazy stuff, but then you kind of get these little gems of knowledge and wisdom from an alcoholic scientist.
and a lot of bullshit too.
And a lot of bullshit too. And so it's all of it.
Schrodinger's cats. And I'm like, it's not that kind of uncertainty. That's not how the uncertainty principle works.
Yeah.
So I guess, again, another question for you guys, all of you, is what about this show resonates with you, especially from your point of studying philosophy and all of that? What grabs you about this kind of thing?
The questions it raises. So one of the famous, I think it was Socrates, who said it was like, I can't teach anyone anything. I can only make them think. I think it might have been Aristotle. I can't remember which Greek it was, but it was one of them. And what he's getting at is that it sometimes takes to get people to care about deep questions. Mm-hmm. Sometimes it takes creative ways of getting people to ask themselves those questions. Art has traditionally been one of the best mediums for doing that. And this is just one of those, just another iteration of how to raise deep existential questions. Because I think our answers to these questions matter a great deal to how our life is going to go. And so this is, instead of having a feel-good comedy or, romantic sitcom sort of thing, it just says, look, shit's crazy and shit's going to keep being crazy and there's nothing you can do about it. Come watch TV. It's a way of laughing at the void. It's a healthy outlet to deal with existential dread, which everyone experiences.
So I found a quote from Dan Harmon, who's the co-creator of the show. And if I can just read that, because I think that kind of sums up what you are saying here. So he said, we have this fleeting chance to participate in an illusion called, I love my girlfriend, I love my dog, whatever. Knowing the truth, which is that nothing matters, can actually save you in those moments. Once you get through that terrifying threshold of accepting that, like you said, nobody exists on purpose, nobody belongs anywhere, everybody's going to die, come watch TV. Then every place is the center of the universe and every moment is the most important moment and everything is the meaning of life. So that's, one of the creators of the show putting that out there. And I think that I feel like for me, that makes sense. That's how I want to live my life, that nothing matters, but kind of everything does, because we can create our own meaning. And it's important to create meaning and not just, say, fuck it, I'm going to kill myself. Like, I want to have coffee.
Yeah.
So I'd rather have the coffee.
Sure. I think the show serves as a kind of Trojan horse in a way. I mean, on the surface level, you have these, zany, bizarre characters that have all these wild adventures, and you get a broad, you're going to have a broad demographic be interested in this kind of, this silly cartoon with all these interesting characters. But then once the Trojan horse gets into your brain and it opens up and forces you at gunpoint to wrestle with these questions, it's holding you hostage to these things, and it makes you take them seriously. And so people who perhaps haven't really thought about these issues before are kind of, without knowing it, they're interacting with these issues in the context of what they thought was just a silly show. Now they're thinking about the death of God. They're thinking about all these different things,
and even about even more mundane existential questions too. So Justin and I have both been enamored with what's called the hard problem of consciousness. Well, when you try to explain this to other people, it's a very difficult concept to explain about how, the what it's likeness to, have an orgasm or eat chicken or,
pretty much the same thing.
Yeah. There's a what it's likeness to do certain things, and we, what is this thing that we call conscious experience and that gives rise to sentience. And in one of the episodes, you see a robot Morty kind of go away from his programming and go, "No, mother, I love you. These are no longer just words." And like, I want to eat ice cream, but not just let it slide down my throat. And so like he's saying all these things that, he's feeling these real feelings, and he wants to have these real conscious experiences.
Yeah.
And so it forces us to ask ourselves, what are the ethical implications of creating a conscious being like this? All of a sudden, are there ethical issues with unplugging computers if they become conscious? Or, these are very abstract.
Is it even possible
questions
to create conscious creatures?
Is it even possible
other
to
than
make
biologically, organically?
Yeah. And most people aren't going to just stumble across these questions just in their everyday life. And you're not going to see it.
They need to be kind of snuck in through the back door, right? And this is what I think Rick and Morty does. It again forces people to wrestle with these issues that wouldn't perhaps otherwise have done so.
But that's good art, though, isn't it? That makes people think.
It's gorgeous art. I mean, in a way, it's art in the way that other shows just can't compare to.
Well, and Justin, when you said it kind of holds you hostage. I mean, I didn't watch Rick and Morty until this summer when I visited Dan in Indiana. We binge watched season 1 one night, season 2 the second night.
There's nothing else to do in Indiana.
So we drank and watched Rick and Morty. But it was the kind of thing where, like, you never know when you're watching something or listening to something or reading something. It's just kind of the perfect time, And for me, Rick and Morty, oddly enough, this cartoon came at the perfect time for me, where I needed something like that to think about some stuff, and was going through some shit, and this strange little cartoon made some stuff make sense and move past the bullshit into nothing means anything, but I'm going to find some meaning. So
just don't think about it.
Right, just don't think about it. And all it took was this fantastic, brilliant piece of art to do that. And that's what's cool, is something that gets conversation started and also creates really great internet memes and stuff. But it's that it goes beyond the meme, because I think anybody on the internet can kind of see, oh, Pickle Rick, whatever, that's hilarious and weird. But then you get into it, and there's so much
people yelling in the comments, Pickle Rick.
Yeah. But there's so much more to it, and that's what's cool, because we are this. It is, and we're
turn yourself into a pickle.
And
I love that episode with Pickle Rick. Well, no, the one in this season where he has to kind of make use of a dead by like picking at the brain in certain spots and like bringing about certain movements. It's fucking amazing. I thought that was so great. And then he like just through his ability to use his tongue, that's the only part he has power over. He's able to create like a, you know,
he even admits, he says, he's like, look, when things happen that I don't like, I just change the world. And I was like, that's the Ubermensch. That's Nietzsche right
that
there.
Is. Yep. Just
like, I just changed the world. Like, don't like something.
I think we should talk more about how he uses his tongue.
Oh,
yeah. Well, I wanted. So the big burning question for me is like all of a sudden all these robot machinery started like installing stuff onto his pickle body. Did he build all that machinery with his tongue?
Did
the brain?
Well, no,
Wouldn't it have just been easier to install those arms without the machinery? See, this is why
you're thinking too much. Don't think about it, Ben. Don't think about it. Don't think about it.
He did not foresee his need to do that. So once he was in a situation where he couldn't, I forget what it was, but he wasn't able to bring himself back to normal. So he had to like manipulate his environment through the one movement he had power over, which was his tongue. And
engineering has ruined cinema in a way like this for me, because I remember watching the very first Iron Man, and I had just taken my microcontrollers class, like programming, and so Tony Stark's like programming this robot. I was like, oh bullshit, no way could he program all that by himself. And I feel like I had that moment with Rick when I was like, oh bullshit, he didn't build all that machinery himself.
So it's fucked up Iron Man and Pickle Rick for you. So God damn it.
Well, Pickle Rick is a play. That scene is a pet play on both John Wick and Iron Man.
See, they just.
So remember when he like comes out of the toilet, and then lands on one. That's Iron Man.
Oh yeah, it is. It's that like superhero landing, right?
Yep. That was a that's a tribute to Iron Man. And Solinya, that's the Russian word for pickle. There was, I can't remember what it was, but in John Wick they called him something. It was a Russian word for whatever. And I was like, oh, I get what they're doing here.
All the references, and that's the thing. It
so many obscure references.
Yeah, and it pulls from so many places that it is just.
Well, I really Cronenberg'd up the world.
Yeah, it's universally appealing, and everybody who has that little bit of weird sensibility about anything in life, and also is, whether aware of it or not, searching for some kind of meaning, this show is perfect. Or you can just laugh at the jokes. Like it's the kind of the perfect show for anybody who, I don't know, has good taste.
If anybody
I just insulted everybody. Yeah.
Well, if anybody's a fan of like a philosopher by the name of Red Grin Grumble, they're really gonna like this show. It covers a lot of wrestles with.
That was good because you made that up. That was a really, you slipped that in nicely, and I was wondering if you were going to do that at some point. So yeah, so everybody could,
I have no shame.
Go and
well played.
Yeah, look up that. Yeah, that really was. I mean, I don't even know that there's like many places to go after you.
For everyone who's watching this and doesn't get that reference, I don't feel sorry for you. Not one bit.
Because it's just YouTube it or something.
Let it go in the background. You can't talk about the reference after it's been made. You've ruined it.
That's right. We did explain it, so that's at least a point for us. Like we've lost a point, we've gained a point, we've broken even. I can live with that.
Net even. Yeah, I think we're okay with that. Yeah.
There you go.
So I think I mean, I don't even know where to go after that, because you just
what options do we have?
There's I don't know if there are any.
I know that the one thing that I had left on my list about talking was the giant heads.
Yeah.
The giant
heads.
Yeah, Ben, show us what you got.
So Justin and I have rigorously defended over the past few years or so what's called the hypothesis of indifference. And so the
rigorously defended this hypothesis.
Yes,
of indifference.
Okay. Yeah.
So it's this idea that it's this hypothesis that that no that neither the condition nor the well-being of sentient creatures is the result of malevolent or beneficent actions by any kind of being, right? So it's a kind of middling. It's an indifference. It's a moral indifference. The way in which we are has come about through morally indifferent
non-intentional processes.
Yeah, and so it's a hypothesis perfectly consistent with atheism and many other views, but it's a rather modest hypothesis, and it has, I think, a lot of explanatory power.
And so you can have a being that's like God, that's perfectly loving or perfectly moral and all-powerful, but there's other options on the table. You could have an all-powerful God who's indifferent, or you could have an all-powerful God who's perfectly evil, and then obviously a range in between. Well, the Heads episode confronts us with that hypothesis of indifference. We're visited by beings from another world that don't give a shit about us. In fact,
they do. It's a reality TV show.
Exactly. Well, so if
we're there to entertain them,
interest in us is only in the ways in which we can entertain them, and if we can't entertain them, they'll entertain themselves by blowing us up. And so basically, what you get is this combination of these. So instead of this perfectly loving God that we would want to think, there's this indifferent being who could possibly be malevolent, and then they create this whole religion around it based on poor reasoning, correlation, causation reasoning, sort of things. And when in reality there was nothing there. It was completely indifferent to us. And so that was a parallel to our world. It's saying that, look, what if the universe is indifferent, which obviously is an assumption Rick and Morty's creators make when they rate, it's a theme throughout the show. What if the universe really is just indifferent to us? It's what it seems like to us.
And all the religious movements of the world are mistakes in correlation, causation, reasoning. Not crazy, irrational mistakes, understandable mistakes for the people of the time. But nevertheless...
even if we see the God in front of us. So, like, Justin and I also defend what's called the hiddenness argument, which is, God is being hidden, and all a perfectly good God, a perfectly loving God wouldn't be hidden like that. Well, these beings aren't hidden. They're in plain view, yet people still develop these completely false theologies about them.
Yeah. And so this was just sort of a manifestation of...
Yeah. It was people searching for meaning in an indifferent universe, and they pushed that rock all the way up to the hill, and then the aliens left, and that rock fell all the way back down, and that whole religion, everything they had created, just collapsed right underneath them.
That's it. So okay, so
at least it didn't take 2,000 years, but go on.
Okay, so I guess to kind of wrap all this up, I'm just going to ask you guys another question, because why not? Because this is more just, this show, talks a lot about meaning or lack of. Where do you guys find meaning in your lives?
Philosophy.
Or what?
Yeah,
what
philosophy.
Is? Yeah.
Love, philosophy. Those are the two.
Love and philosophy.
That's pretty much it. Yeah. And just getting in. I think that this is broadly applicable. You find any activity that you genuinely can immerse yourself in and enjoy, where you get so deep into it that you lose track of time. If you're doing something and you lose track of time, it's generally a good sign that you're onto something that's really good for you as a person.
Kill you.
Yeah, and for some people that's philosophy. For others, that's take your pick. Anything really in the world.
Yeah.
And those are the kinds of things that that can be those motivations to put your feet on the ground in the morning and stand up, get out of bed.
Find the
do
things,
something.
The activities, and the people, I think, that make you want to get out of bed in the morning.
Be your overman.
I like that. So where on the internet can people find you guys, promote anything you want to promote as we bring this to an end?
Sure. So we're primarily a podcast, and you can find this podcast on iTunes just by a simple search of Real Atheology. You can find our website at realatheology.com. We also have a Twitter account, which is predictably at Real Atheology, and a Facebook page, and we regularly interact on all those. Yes.
And a YouTube channel.
And so, yeah, if anybody enjoyed this, we'd love to hear from you. And if anybody's interested in philosophy of religion, taking it seriously, rather than just, making fun of religious people, we want to have you on and talk about stuff. So.
Yeah, you guys are doing great stuff. It's a really great podcast. We always end with a quote of the week on our show. And so I don't think there's anything better to say than just don't think about it.
There you go.
There we go.
That's everything we just said.
They already did. If they're still listening, they already forgot.
Doesn't matter anyways.
It doesn't matter. Nothing matters. Don't think about it.
Same conversation. Well, I don't know that Marsh even read it, but the same thing I said to Marsh earlier today on Twitter is he's lamenting that he doesn't understand emojis, and it's the fact that you're thinking about it in the first place means you don't understand emojis and how they're used.
There is no understanding emojis.
Right, exactly. And then I think even Natalie fell into that trap. She's like, well, that's not why you use the football. I didn't know it was a
7-year-old, but I at least know what emojis are.
You're doing emojis on your Chromebook all the time, like that. You just
yeah, that's what it is.
Fully an emoji.
You'll be right next to my 7-year-old. All right, he'll be 8 then. He'll be 8 then. Let's be fair.
All right. Did you stop?
Are we ending this?
Yeah,
I haven't stopped it yet. Am I supposed to?
I drew it to a close. I did my thing. I did my job.
We're supposed to promote the YouTube channel. Watch the whole video on YouTube. We're going to do another. Natalie and I are going to talk for probably under half an hour. Because I haven't had dinner. I haven't had dinner yet, and it's like 9:30, and I'm hungry. Yeah, I know. So you can check that out on the Patreon page at patreon.com/TSE podcast. And thanks a lot, guys, for joining us.
Thanks for having us on.
All right.